So if you do want to find out how to get more involved in some of the things that Karen's been doing, there's those slips on your chair to join our e-bulletin, so that's one way to keep informed, and obviously the Connecting Country website and other things. So we've got about 20 minutes for a panel discussion. So I think there's some mics in the aisles, and so does anybody have a question for our panel?
My question is to Will. You were talking about species moving already. Could you give us an example of maybe an animal or a plant that's doing that, or?
Yeah, I'll give you several examples. There have been a lot of marine species that moved southwards along the east coast of Australia and now found in Tasmanian waters that weren't found in Tasmanian waters 30 years ago. The most common species, obviously, that move are ones that can move in a fluid, either the atmosphere or the water. Atmospheric examples are flying foxes or other types of bats which are moving southwards as the climate warms from Queensland into New South Wales, for example, along the coast. Where I live in Canberra, we're starting to see birds like the crested pigeon, which was found further north, up around Dubbo and Forbes, are now in Canberra. Rainbow lorikeets are now overwintering in Canberra, and they weren't 20 years ago. Gang cockatoos are moving up into the mountains west of Canberra and out of the city. There's a really good database of this. It resides here in Melbourne at the Bureau of Meteorology, and it's kept by Linda Chambers. So if you get onto the website and get onto her, she's tried to collate an enormous amount of data of birds and I believe butterflies and other insects, and starting to track movements of these species. For longer-lived species, it's harder to see because it takes a while for a tree that has a 2 or 3 year lifetime to move, and that's part of the problem, is it probably can't move fast enough to stick with the climate. So those are some examples that you can see.
Sorry, Will, can you just tell us again the website for that information?
The Bureau of Meteorology, so go www.bom.gov.au and surf for Linda Chambers' work, Lynda, Linda Chambers. And that's the best database in Australia I know of how species are already moving.
Thank you, Will. Is there another question?
Could you explain a little bit more about the term resilience? I don't think I'm know enough about that, building resilience.
Yeah, there's actually a large literature around that now. It means a system that is able to withstand stresses and shocks and basically keep functioning in the state that it is now. That's sort of the short definition. So in other words, a system that can take an extreme climatic event, can take an invasive species and so on. It has a lot to do with having well-connected, biodiverse, rich ecosystems. They tend to be resilient in terms of being able to withstand shocks, keep the same composition, and be able to function. As soon as we start simplifying ecosystems, either by taking a lot of species out, by converting them to a simpler species like a grassland or an agricultural system, in general they lose resilience. And that's why they're more prone to invasive species coming in and taking hold and so on. So one of the key management goals is to maintain and rebuild, as the other two speakers have said, resilient ecosystems which are more biodiverse, more species rich, and so on. I put the term transformation in there because as climate is going to shift and is shifting very rapidly, ecosystems will try to maintain their composition and state for as long as they can in general. But there will come a point when they will want to transform into something different that we may not recognize as climate shifts too much. We need to be alert to that, and in fact, there may be a danger in trying to hold on to the ecosystem we have in the place that it sits now as it's trying to reconstruct itself into something different. That's going to be an extremely tricky thing to do, and the best thing I think we can do is just make space for that process to happen.
Can I just add something to that? The other important point about resilience, as Will's suggesting there, that it's actually about the interplay of social systems and ecosystems. So one of the things that's really important to build resilience is to have resilient social communities of human beings who are able to care for country in a way that builds ecosystem resilience. And there's, if you have a look on the websites of the Resilience Alliance, they have a lot of really good examples of what that interplay between people and nature and how you can beef it up.
I think we've got a question over here with Ruth.
When Will finished speaking, I was thinking I wanted to ask him to talk about the positives and the negatives of people making the sea change or the tree change. But now, following Karen's talk, I would love to live where she lives, but with all the threats of bushfires, I would also like to hear opinions about the wisdom of encouraging people to live in that environment.
Me? I guess I've lived near the bush for a long time, and the wisdom's an odd word. I think we do things in life because we have to do, well, I as a person have done things in life because for me, for my insight, for my soul, for my beliefs in what I think the land should do, have to do certain things. But many people have asked me, well, in fact, even this morning in a conversation on the train, well, now that maybe there is climate change and it's drying up, isn't it getting too hot for you up there? And my answer is, you just live where you live and you do the best you can, but you make your choices. And although it's hotter and drier, you can manage with that without making an impact. So it's what we put in and what we get out that's important. I don't think of this as a tree change for me. For me, it's going back to where I belong. And unless that's what you really want to do, then, well, you do want to do it. Go to where you belong, or be where you belong, and wherever it is that you are, do what you can. Whether you stay in the suburbs, or whether you move to the fringe of a city, or whether you move to a country town, whether you go to the beach, or whether you go to New South Wales or Queensland, there is something that everybody can do to support this interchange of people and ecosystems. All right? So you be where you are and do what you can. I don't know whether that answers your question, but...
Do either of you two want to say something?
Well, only point about the fire issue, that we would be arguing that trying to minimise disturbance in the landscape, such as logging operations, would be one way to try and think about building the resilience of forests to ensure that forests are able to reach ecological maturity, and my understanding is that those forests are better able to withstand fire. In terms of how people make choices about where they live, I think that needs to be done carefully, and I think the sorts of plantings that we've heard occurring up around Castlemaine that try and increase their biodiversity, the range of species that are used, that's better than living next to a pine plantation, for example, in hot weather.
Sorry, Will.
That's right.
And yes, I think we have to be sensible about this. So while I talk about the plantings, they're not actually in front of my house. Nevertheless, we have encouraged the grasses to come up, and grasses have come back amazingly around the house. So you can protect yourself to some extent, and you be sensible about this. Now, there's fire research, and I don't know a lot about it, but cleared areas, and I think Paul's alluded to this, can be just as dangerous in terms of fire speed as having bushed areas, which can actually impede the path or the speed of a fire. And hopefully there will be a lot more comes out and is recognised scientifically after this Royal Commission that's happened.
Yeah, just one final very quick comment is I think Paul and Karen have said a lot of very good practical things that we should think about at a local and regional scale. But we can't forget the global scale, and that's why I said we need a two-pronged approach. That if we forget about the global mitigation effort, we'll have probably an uncontrollable situation toward the end of the century.